On June 2nd, 2019, Grandma Nam arrived in Ganpo, Seoul to look after her granddaughter, Lee Ui-seon, while her daughter and son-in-law were away on an overnight trip. This wasn't her first visit. She was very close with her daughter's family and always cherished the moments spent with Lee Ui-seon. Her granddaughter, however, was a bit peculiar, and she knew how hard parenting Ui-seon had been on her daughter. As a grandparent, she felt it was her duty to come and ease the tensions in the household and helped raise the girl. But now, at nearly 20, Ui-seon was all grown up, yet she was still the black sheep of the family. Her odd behavior and weird social quirks made her a target for bullies, meaning even at the age of 19, she had no friends. Grandma Nam didn't mind her company though, and enjoyed spending time with her granddaughter. When she arrived that evening, the parents had already left, so Ui-seon was home alone. Grandma Nam made sure that she ate a hearty dinner, even though it was getting very late. As it got closer to 12:30 a.m., Grandma Nam changed into her pajamas and headed towards her daughter's room. But Ui-seon stopped her and suggested that she sleep in her room instead. It was a kind gesture, so she accepted and got into the single bed. Ui-seon sat on the floor next to the bed talking to her grandma about trivial things until she could hear her grandma snoring. Ui-seon stayed, listening to her grandma sleep to make sure she wouldn't wake if she got up and left. Once she was certain her grandma was asleep, she quietly got up and uncovered a small grocery bag she had hid in the corner of her room. She kept one eye on her grandma as she opened the rustling plastic bag. Noises always sound louder at night, but Grandma Nam was fast asleep. From the bag, she pulled out a pair of gloves, which she put on, and then reached back into the bag to pull out 2 brand new sashimi knives. Ui-seon returned to kneel by the bed as she waited with anticipation. She waited a long while, just watching her grandmother sleep, snoring soundly, unaware of the danger that was sitting next to her bed. Grandma Nam's eyes opened as she stirred in her sleep, or perhaps Ui-seon nudged her awake, but the only thing she could see was Ui-seon leaning over the bed, staring widely at her with a look of intent. Grandma Nam didn't react, as this wasn't that unusual of behavior for Ui-seon. She instead smiled and asked, "Why aren't you sleeping?" and reached up to caress Ui-seon's cheek. She gave a weak smile back and responded, "Grandma, should I tell you a story?" Welcome to Korean True Crime, with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. Thank you to my patrons for making this show possible. Korean True Crime has a sticker tier available now in our loyalty tiers. The first sticker is inspired by spicy buldak noodles. You get a new sticker every 3 months if you join us on Patreon. Link is in the description. Lastly, join us on Discord for movie nights of films based off of real crimes. Link is also in the description. Warning: today's episode contains discussions of suicidal ideation and extremist sexist beliefs. Listener discretion is advised. Lee Ui-seon revealed the knives she had hidden under her leg. Without emotion, she raised the knife up. She didn't kill her grandmother quickly or with mercy. She stabbed at her with fury. She began stabbing her grandmother repeatedly with long strikes. She stabbed her grandmother 31 times in the eyes, ears, throat, and collarbone. The autopsy revealed she was striking with great force and quickly. She potentially was trying to recreate killings she'd seen in the news, movies, or online. She stood up when she was finished, clothes soaked in blood, and walked to her parents' room, where she started violently slashing at their bed and pillows before she got tired and stopped. She left the knife and walked to the bathroom to pick up a red lipstick that she had left on the countertop. She began to write, 할머니 죽이고 나도 죽음, meaning, grandmother died and I died too. When the police first saw this, they thought this was a suicide note that she had left behind. Perhaps she felt shame or guilt for killing her grandmother. But this mere writing shared similarities with the murderer that Ui-seon had searched for online named William Herons, also dubbed the Lipstick Killer. There are many cases that involve a killer leaving behind a note written in lipstick. Herons wasn't the first, but he is the most infamous. He's famous for a note left behind on a victim's wall in lipstick that read, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." Ui-seon filled up the bathtub with water and sat on the edge of the tub. As it filled, she felt her anxiety continue to climb as the adrenaline of killing her grandmother started to wear off. By the time she climbed into the tub and submerged her head under the water, she'd already began to face the fear of death. Death was something she'd thought about a lot, and while she did want to end her own life, she feared death even more. When her body began to demand air, and she felt her chest tighten, fear overcame her, and she sat up out of the water, gasping for air. She would say she couldn't go through with it because she was too afraid of dying. It's likely that the adrenaline had completely worn off by this time. So instead of taking her life, she cleaned herself off and decided to leave the apartment. She hadn't made a plan for this, so she tried to think of what she should do. She thought about maybe just going to the living room and waiting for her parents to come home, but she could feel the presence of her grandmother in the other room. Ui-seon would say that her grandmother's body was so frightening, she felt like she had to leave the home immediately. Whether she was superstitious or not, the gravity of what she had done was weighing on her, but it felt like her grandmother's spirit was already haunting her. Ui-seon impulsively dropped her cell phone into the toilet and grabbed her grandmother's phone as she left. It was nearly 4:30 a.m. when she left the apartment building to roam the streets. She walked as far away from the apartment building as she could, hoping to shake the feeling of terror and guilt. But what she couldn't express was that the feeling she actually had was the reality setting in. The reality of the situation was that Ui-seon's life had built up to this point. The path her life took steered her towards violent and aggressive behavior. As a child, she exhibited odd behaviors often. She was cold, blunt, and often highly emotional. Her parents wondered if there was something wrong, but she'd never been taken to see a psychologist or a therapist. When she was in school, teachers noticed that she had great difficulty relating to the other students and often said inappropriate things or said things that made the other students afraid of her. She wasn't violent or mean. Rather, she was just weird. It was because of these strange behaviors and interests that the other students avoided her. She wouldn't form any friendships in all of her schooling years, and bullying was a common occurrence. It was lonely for her to be surrounded by so many people, but not one understood her or made an effort to. Because she struggled in silence, Ui-seon drifted away from everyone in the world, including her own parents. Ui-seon's parents also had difficulty understanding why she was so defiant and enjoyed doing gross things, like soiling her pants and not telling anyone for hours. Ui-seon would tell the police that she experienced sexual harassment and bullying her entire life, beginning in elementary school. She said that the other students would make inappropriate remarks or suggestive comments throughout her school years, and these comments deeply affected her confidence. In particular, she always was bullied by the boys in her classes, and she felt like there wasn't a single boy or man in her life who treated her kindly. Even her own father was extremely strict and often scolded her for her impulsions. When she graduated high school with meager grades, she didn't think she'd ever be accepted into university, but she was. Her parents had threatened that if she hadn't gotten into college, they would stop supporting her entirely and she'd have to find her own housing. So when she did get accepted, It felt like a miracle. But men at the university were no better than they were in grade school. Ui-seon said that while on campus, she was sexually harassed by a fellow student that scared her so badly, she dropped out that very day. She had been battling depression and anxiety since childhood, which made it challenging for her to concentrate on schoolwork. What no one else knew was that Lee Ui-seon had started obsessing about death and mortality when she was at a very young age. She'd focused all of her interests on the theme of death, including the books that she chose to read, websites she visited, and stories she wrote. She was both fearful and thrilled by death. And because she was so preoccupied with thinking about her own mortality, schoolwork and friendships felt like a menial waste of time. When she did drop out of university, she decided to begin working. But there is a limitation on what jobs a woman without a degree can apply for. Even in the last decade, as I lived in Korea, I heard from many women with degrees who spoke multiple languages and were skilled workers that they could only find minimum wage jobs that worked them close to 50 hours a week without overtime. The reality of what life is like for women in Korea enraged Ui-seon. Ui-seon had a fury inside of her already that hated men, and all she needed was an echo chamber to vent that anger. It's a dangerous path to feed into your anger by only listening to like-minded people who never stop to question their rage. While her anger wasn't unfounded, it wasn't healthy to live a life of hatred. Ui-seon searched online for others who felt the way that she did. She had been a part of online communities for a while now, since she had struggled to make friends at school. She socialized online where she felt less judged by others. One of those online forums she found was WOMAD, an online community based in South Korea that loosely considers themselves a feminist organization. I say loosely because, as you'll hear, they're more akin to a hate organization. WOMAD and Meghalaya, the original group, play a large role in the radicalization of Lee Ui-seon's thoughts. We'll start with the history of what Meghalaya is. Meghalaya is a bad word in Korea now because of their terrible reputation of being an online hate group against men. Most feminist organizations are considered hate groups in Korea, although many of them do not deserve this title. I should preface this by stating that I myself have a background working with women's centers and briefly a feminist organization that fundraised for women's shelters. I preface this not because I don't believe I'll be impartial to their history, but that I want to acknowledge that feminism in South Korea is very unique to their own culture. We cannot compare different countries' fights for human rights and the difficulties they have. However, as you'll learn, feminism in Korea is a bad word. The concept of feminism is all but banned from mainstream media, and even reading a book deemed a feminist novel can ruin a celebrity's career. For example, in 2022, a popular streamer, Jo Jang-mi, who went by the name Jami, took her own life following years of receiving online harassment from fans who accused her of being a feminist. It started when she received sexual harassment online and demanded an apology from the men who harassed her, which angered anti-feminist male extremists who accused her of being a feminist after she refused to accept the harassment. Then later, she used her index finger and thumb to show the measurement of an item on a live stream. Fans accused her of being a feminist again because this pinching finger symbol is the logo of the group Meghalaya. Jami was forced to apologize multiple times to dissuade rumors that she was not a feminist and didn't support feminism, but she still lost most of her following. After enduring years of harassment, Jami took her own life in 2022, and a letter was posted on her streaming account from her uncle that detailed in her suicide note, she said she took her life due to the bullying. Feminism in Korea is not anywhere near what we consider it to be in America or other Western countries. And it is because of this hatred of feminism that sparked the founders of Meghalaya to form their own community for women. Magalia emerged as an online feminist community in 2015, and they quickly gained popularity because they had a very unique strategy of mirroring misogyny. The group was primarily women who would share misogynistic content that they found online, and then they would make a second version of the misogynistic picture or text with the genders swapped. These images or fake posts would be absurd and humorous in nature, and that's what the members enjoyed most. That's what brought a lot of women in. The satirical approach not only was for entertainment, but it educated about how absurd sexism really is. They wanted to show everyone that sexism in the world, particularly Korea, had been widely accepted for far too long, and most people didn't even realize it. Magalia actually was formed following the MERS outbreak of 2015 after a false report of 2 Korean women who had broken quarantine measures to go partying and shopping in Hong Kong was being spread online. This incident sparked a lot of hate towards women, and there was a huge increase of posts referring to Korean women as stupid gold diggers. When the false report turned out to be fake, there were no apologies, no corrections, no second thoughts. It seemed that these men online just wanted an opportunity to hate women. So the founders of Magalia decided to make their own online forum on DC Inside, which is a site notorious for their unfiltered discussions, similar to Reddit or 4chan. Their fake articles and posts were akin to the satirical news site The Onion, and many of them were really clever, while still challenging misogyny. Despite their clearly satirical and humorous nature, men online were really upset with these posts and started to report the accounts en masse. This led to their community being shut down. If they tried to make new accounts, they'd also be shut down. So they chose to move to Facebook, where these men continued to follow them and report the groups. Finally, they decided they just had to make their own website. There are still archives of their website, and you can still read many of the posts that they made in the final years. Many of the posts are women just sharing articles involving sexual harassment or assault and discussing current events. Pretty tame stuff. I didn't find anything too absurd on the site's archives, at least. Magalia, in their heyday, played a significant role in dismantling SoraNet, which you might have heard of before. It was a notorious revenge porn site that took a long while to take down. In the future, we may talk about that case, because it truly was horrendous what happened. But the women in Magalia organized protests and fundraisers to help get this site taken down, while supporting the victims of the revenge porn. It was a worthy cause. They also dedicated time to challenging Korean beauty standards, protesting violence against women, and advocating for gender equality. Their content was bold and eye-catching, which is what they wanted. They wanted to shock a complacent nation that just accepted gender inequality as the norm. As time went on, they decided to reclaim derogatory terms used against women, such as kimchi woman, which is a gold digger. They also coined a term hannamchung, which means a Korean man larva. They used this to mirror similar terms used to belittle women and downplay violence towards women on misogynistic websites. They made terms for talking about men with small genitals, terms for men who don't care about their children, and other terms talking about different kinds of men they didn't like. They reclaimed crude words for women similar to bitch or cunt. They also referred to the act of rebelling against patriarchy as de-corseting. They had a lot of anger, but also a lot of humor in their creation of terms, most of which just seemed to be flipped versions of terms that already existed. They even referred to the world that they lived in as the dick tricks, which was a play on dick and matrix as a way to criticize the patriarchal world that they lived in. Humor was the primary weapon in their battle against misogyny. A part of this, too, was that there were some disagreements regarding non-heterosexual men. Some members embraced LGBTQIA men, whereas others firmly were against men regardless of their sexuality or gender expression. Opposition to Magalia came from groups like 일배 저장소, which means Daily Best Archive. They're an alt-right anti-feminist, anti-immigrant, and anti-LGBT community. Their ideology bore striking similarities to Western incel communities, characterized by a troubling mix of misogyny and extremism. They engage in alarming practices, including creating real and deepfake pornography of underage girls and demanding that women submit to male authority because they call women a commodity. Despite their own extreme views, Ilbe Jojangso's campaign against Megalia was effective, framing them as radical misandrists in the public eye. One visible consequence of this backlash was the social ban of the index finger and thumb pinching symbol in South Korea, which is associated with shaming a male's genital size. Any politician or celebrity doing this will be forced to formally apologize to this day, and that is because it is Megalia's logo. It's just an index finger and a thumb making a small pinch symbol. As part of Megalia's counterattack against men, this symbol represented a woman stating a man had a small penis. So it was correct that their purpose was to body shame men. They used this because they wanted to point out the double standard of body shaming in South Korea. Mainstream media could call the woman too fat, too tall, too this, too that, while insinuating anything about a man's body was heretical. Eating disorders were rampant due to the portrayal of women and women's bodies in media and the blatant body shaming in advertisements. This is still an issue to this day. As Megalia reached its peak in late 2015, early 2016, concerning posts started to be made. Whether these were genuine members or trolls is unclear. However, women started to make posts discussing engaging in sexual acts with young boys. Some people thought this was satire against the male groups talking about Lolita-like underage girls. But then, to counter revenge porn, women began to post explicit content of men without their consent, as well as posting gory images of men's genitalia and insulting it. This type of content didn't happen often, and it was banned by the leaders of the group, but this didn't stop it from happening. Megalia followers were incredibly divided about their acceptance of homosexuality as well, and it became popular on the site to start outing gay men who were married to women. Homosexuality was not widely accepted in South Korea, and many would say that it still isn't. They viewed these men as harming women they tricked into marrying them. Some people took the satire way too far, or it wasn't satire at all, and it was because of this that sealed Megalia's fate. Megalia was forced to shut down in 2017 after many attempts to rein in their own community. I promise this is all necessary for contextualization, because WOMAD was formed from those who left Megalia to make their own uncensored group in 2016. WOMAD is a word that means woman nomad. WOMAD itself doesn't identify as feminist, rather they seem to identify as neoliberal and anti-misogynist. WOMAD, unlike Megalia, has not tried to make any meaningful changes in society with protests, campaigns, or fundraisers. They merely exist as an online community. It's important to note that the angriest of the members of Megalia left to form this group when they were told that revenge porn, pedophilia, and gore were not welcome on Megalia's site. WOMAD's site is akin to 4chan or 2channel, which are both anonymous forums that descended into online trolling, hate speech, and illegal acts being posted on their sites. On WOMAD, if you like a post, rather than a heart or an upwards arrow, you click a swastika. Many posts to this day include animal abuse, mocking veterans, male victims of sexual assault, and even making their own hidden camera pornography called murka of men. Some of the group's posts even include buying and selling videos of child sexual abuse material involving young boys. The group is also known for their hatred of LGBTQIA people, and within Korea, they are referred to as TERFs, or trans exclusionary radical feminists. WOMAD, we can confidently say, however, is not a radical feminist group. However, although they still are referred to as a feminist group by misogynist groups. we return back to Ui-seon's story and her involvement in WOMAD. I hope you can kind of see now how this case is labeled as a feminist kills her grandma, and that it's clear Ui-seon was really not concerned in the least about feminism. Rather, she was just participating in an online hate group that fueled the anger inside of her, which only led to her being enticed and encouraged into homicidal thought. Ui-seon had a lot of interest in true crime, although it seems to be very common that many premeditated killers showed some interest in other murder cases. Whether she used it as research or a hobby, she knew she was going to kill someone someday. Specifically, she enjoyed learning about the Kangsa PC room murder. I'll briefly explain what happened, because it is quite short. In 2018, a man named Kim Sung-soo, 29 years old, walked into a PC방 in Seoul. He came in with his younger brother, who was also in a sour mood. He went to an empty computer that had not yet been cleaned and sat down, despite there being clean seats available. He started loudly berating the young man who was working. As the worker cleaned the desk, he scowled at Sung-soo's rudeness, which caused Sung-soo to start cursing at him. The worker apologized, hoping that Sung-soo would just leave him alone. But later, after losing a few games, Sung-soo approached the front desk and demanded a refund for his time. He said it was their computers that was causing him to lose. Sung-soo's younger brother watched as they started fighting. The part-time worker said he couldn't offer a refund even if he had only been there for $1 worth of time because he didn't have access to the refund system because he wasn't a manager. He would be able to give the refund the next day, however. Sung-soo didn't like this answer, and they started to fight. Sung-soo's younger brother decided to call the police, stating that the part-time worker was cursing at them and refusing to refund them. The part-time worker chose to also call the police because of the situation, but the police told him they'd already been dispatched. When the officer arrived, they listened to the stories and decided nothing serious had happened. But the part-time worker told him that Sung-soo had threatened to kill him. The officer didn't believe that this was anything more than an argument and left the building with no real resolution. The officer didn't even make the two brothers leave the establishment. The younger brother went to the bathroom while Sung-soo left and ran home. He lived just a few minutes away. When the PC방 closed shortly after, the younger brother waited outside for Sung-soo, where they met up and watched the exit for the part-time worker to leave. Sung-soo had told his brother that they were going to beat him up. When the worker came down the escalator, Sung-soo revealed a large machete he had hidden. The part-time worker subdued Sung-soo, but the brother grabbed his waist and pulled him off. That is when Sung-soo began to stab the worker in the face and throat more than 70 times. When the worker protected himself with his hands were cut into pieces. The brother fled when he saw the weapon, not knowing that his brother meant to kill the worker. He thought they were just going to rough him up a little bit. A quick conclusion, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. His brother wasn't charged with anything. The crime happened in 2018, near the end of my first year living in Korea, and it was talked about everywhere. The public criticized the police for not caring about the victim's complaints. They could have saved the worker's life if they took it seriously. Lee Ui-seon seemed to have an interest in this case not because of the true crime aspect or the misjustice, but rather because she had an interest in bloody, violent crimes, and she would find like-minded people who liked these bloody crimes on WOMAD. Ui-seon's access to these sites immersed her into hateful thinking and created antisocial thoughts that changed her entire frame of mind. She started with anger in her heart, and with the encouragement of these antagonist sites, she lost all grounding of the real world. It became a me versus all men, black and white situation in which men were the enemy who needed to pay for the sins of their gender. This type of thinking is dangerous and can be seen in radical hate groups, like supremacist groups, extremist religious groups, and even misogynist groups. While misandrist groups are more rare, it seemed like these women were indeed becoming a hate group. Now, these hate groups don't just form overnight. They start as a way for like-minded people to come together and find community. people who feel oppressed. Their meager beginnings are often related to finding friends and having someone to talk to. However, as the group establishes themselves as the good and establishes their enemy as bad, then their united hatred begins to classify the outsider as a threat. Paranoia, anxiety, and anger shape their bias and behaviors until finally they act on these feelings in a typically violent manner. Ui-seon has chosen not to speak to reporters regarding her involvement in WOMAD, which leaves her motives and mind a mystery. The brutality of the crime against her grandmother felt as if she was taking out the anger she had towards men on someone she loved and cared deeply about. There seems to be more to the puzzle than really anyone knows. After Ui-seon murdered her grandmother, she wandered her neighborhood aimlessly. Her parents were set to arrive at 10 a.m., 5.5 hours after Ui-seon left the apartment. Her parents did arrive home when they expected to, and were surprised to come home and see no one was inside. They walked around looking in the rooms, asking, "Are you still sleeping?" They searched the apartment until they found Grandma Nam dead inside Ui-seon's bed. They searched for Ui-seon frantically because at first they thought that their daughter was not the killer. They thought this must be a home invasion or a kidnapping. The parents called the police immediately, who arrived at the scene. They found her phone in the toilet and the note on the mirror. It was clear that Ui-seon was not a victim in the crime, rather a perpetrator. They hadn't known that Ui-seon had taken the grandmother's phone, so rather than track the phone, they started using CCTV footage in the apartment to see which direction she left. Then, using street CCTV, they easily tracked her movements through the night into the morning. She didn't seem to have a purpose when roaming the streets and was just walking as far as she could. She didn't run or hide. She just walked. They found her whereabouts 4 hours later, around 2 p.m., and apprehended her at 2:40 p.m., little more than 4 hours after the parents called the police. She didn't resist as she was handcuffed and placed into the police car. She wasn't crying, and she didn't say anything to defend herself. She had just accepted her fate. When the police interrogated her, Ui-seon was forthcoming about her motives. She said that she had planned to kill herself and it felt unfair that she would die alone, so she chose her grandmother to come to the afterlife with her. She murdered her grandmother and then tried to drown herself in the bathtub, but when she tried to, she got scared and gave up. She was scared about the reality of what she had done and fled the house. The police had collected photographs of the writing she had done on the bathroom mirror. However, Ui-seon's statements to the police were often incoherent or incomprehensible. She spoke in fragments and often stopped in the middle of sentences without reason. They suspected that she was in a state of psychosis, as if she was losing some grasp of what was reality. The investigators were not convinced that this was a murder-suicide. There seemed to be something else seriously wrong here. Prior to this, Ui-seon had no history of mental illness, at least formally. Prior to killing her grandmother, she had, however, searched extensively online for various knife killings, types of knives, and how to murder someone with a knife. She had made plans to murder. But the brutality of the crime, stabbing her 30 times, is odd for a murder-suicide, a mercy killing. Ui-seon had told the police she was afraid of dying alone, so she just decided to take her grandma with her. But there was rage in the way that she killed her grandmother. An arrest warrant for the charge of parricide was requested on the 4th and was issued on the 5th. They held her in jail because they believed she was a flight risk and potential danger to others. While in police custody, she tried to kill herself numerous times, and the police considered her a suicide risk as well. This is when the investigators spent more time with her and learned her motives. She told the police, "I hated men because I'd experienced sexual harassment. I wanted to kill a man. I actually wanted to kill a man, but I couldn't. I wanted to stab a man with a knife, but I couldn't find a man to kill because I never go out." Ui-seon's parents had told her that her grandmother would be coming to spend the night while they were away. That is when Ui-seon decided that this would be the perfect opportunity. Her parents had left the house that morning on the 2nd, but her grandma wouldn't arrive until later in the evening. In the meantime, she left the house and went to the store at around 4:30 p.m. to purchase the knife. She had read about various different murders committed in which men had murdered women using knives, which is much more common in Korea than gun crime. She had obsessed over the PC room killing, which involved a machete. She also found humor in that case because the victim had their fingers cut off. She decided to use a similar type of knife, a sushi knife. She worried that maybe one knife might be dull or might be difficult to use, so she purchased 5 different of the sashimi knives, which are incredibly sharp. The knives were about a foot long each, with an 8-inch blade. She also purchased a hammer to knock her victim unconscious, but did not need to use it as her grandmother was already asleep. As well, she bought 4 pairs of gloves and then returned home to hide them in her bedroom. When asked why she targeted her grandmother, she spoke as if she was rationalizing what happened, as if the police would look at her and say, yeah, of course, I would have done the same thing. She said that she wanted to kill a man because she hated all men, because of what she had experienced. But because she couldn't find a victim, she decided it would be easier to kill someone close to her, her grandmother. Afterwards was when she felt such incredible guilt, she decided to take her own life by drowning herself. But she couldn't keep her head under the water because she was scared. That's when she decided to leave the apartment because she said her grandmother's corpse was scaring her. The investigation was short because Ui-seon was readily confessing to her crimes, but she chose not to speak any more about her motives. Lee Ui-seon's confessions led to a quick trial, which began on November 8, 2019. In her first trial, the prosecution sought 15 to 50 years in prison for the brutal, premeditated murder of her grandmother. The judge heard the case and determined that a sentence of 25 years would be more appropriate for the crime, taking into account her young age and that she had no prior record of violence. They believed with mental health treatment and time, she could return to society in 25 years at the age of 45. The judge stated that the defendant killed her maternal grandmother who cared for her, and that prior to stabbing her grandmother, Lee Ui-seon had stated that Grandma Nam had reached out and caressed her cheek lovingly. The severity and gravity of the crime in this case cannot be tolerated. However, the judge also agreed that Ui-seon was a first-time offender who was young. Lee Ui-seon expressed deep remorse and was under extreme psychological distress due to mental illness and a lack of interpersonal relationships. Her parents had also asked for leniency in her sentencing. As well, a psychopathy test was conducted, and Lee Ui-seon was determined to not suffer from antisocial personality disorder, meaning that she had a higher chance of rehabilitation to reduce her risk of recidivism. Thus, she was sentenced to 25 years. After spending some time in prison, Lee Ui-seon's attorney filed an appeal on April 8, 2020. The appeal cited that Lee Ui-seon's sentencing should be reduced because in the first trial, her insanity was not taken into consideration due to her schizophrenic personality disorder. However, the original judge declared that Lee Ui-seon showed no signs of mental impairment and had an understanding and comprehension of the consequences of her actions. In the first trial, Lee Ui-seon had undergone evaluation for schizophrenic personality disorder. She didn't meet the diagnostic criteria. She did, however, have schizotypal personality disorder, which is different. Schizophrenia is marked by hallucinations and delusions, whereas schizotypal personality disorder does not include hallucinations or delusions. A defining symptom is having difficulties with interpersonal relationships and the presence of social anxiety. People with schizotypal personality disorder often have very eccentric behavior and thoughts. Schizotypy is associated with aggression in adults, and according to psychologists, the disorder shares many similarities with autism. Lee Ui-seon was reevaluated and was found to have no impairment that prevented her from understanding what was real and what was fake. She testified several times that she felt like she was being controlled and could hear voices telling her that she needed to die. However, her psychological analysis discovered that this was thought distortion, which is typical in schizotypy patients, rather than an actual auditory hallucination. However, it's difficult to determine what the state of mind she was in when she committed her crimes. Ui-seon did have some odd behaviors that stuck out to psychologists when they interviewed her parents and others who knew her, like her former teachers. I mentioned before that she would often soil her pants and not tell people, but she would also play with her own feces in the toilet or carry it around in her hand. Her parents had also caught her trying to eat her own menstrual blood as well. Previously, Ui-seon had stated that she faced sexual harassment in college, as well as in elementary school and middle school as well. She was bullied all throughout school due to these odd behaviors, and in high school, she started to become very angry and aggressive. She also exhibited extreme defensiveness and took on a victim mentality when approaching any situation. Anyone who talked to her was going to ridicule her. Anyone who looked at her was judging her. It was what she first thought of when people interacted with her, was that they were going to do it to ridicule her or be mean to her. The investigators also brought up that she had posted online using her phone and computer many misandrist posts. Some threatened violence against men and married women. She also visited and participated in groups like WOMAD that encouraged suicidal ideation along with hostility towards men. On top of that, she was struggling at home. Her parents were not prepared or equipped to raise a child with schizotypal personality disorder. They never once tried to help her. She testified that her father had told her if she didn't get into college and attend for 1 year, they would kick her out of their home. Her mother would often get angry at her and told her that she wished she had died. This seemed to be a common sentiment in their household. The parents just wanted Ui-seon to disappear. There seemed to be very little love between the parents and Ui-seon. After learning this, the judge was confused why Ui-seon would kill her loving and caring grandmother, while her parents were the ones who treated her so poorly. She chose to kill the one person who loved her. Despite her testimony, her parents denied emotionally abusing her and expressed their love for her in court and asked for leniency in both of the trials. Although her situation was sad and she lacked the mental health support she needed, it had no bearing on the fact that she had murdered her grandmother. They determined that Ui-seon showed a lack of empathy, lack in social norms, and had emotional confusion that influenced her actions. They did take into account her mental illness and reduced her sentence from 25 years to 17 years. She would also spend 10 years wearing an ankle monitor. She is set to be released from prison in 2036 at the age of 36. As always, thank you for listening. Join us on Discord for free movie nights, find sources for free on Patreon, join our quarterly sticker club on Patreon, and follow the show wherever you listen from. Leaving written reviews really helps me grow. Thank you to my patrons, Vix Mac, Lala, William White, G1 Edwards, Nico, Elijah Hancock, Anomanom, Dr. Bob, Lumos, Emma Brown, David Tafoya, Adriana, Pip, Dade512, Lisa, Veronica, Olive, Caitlin, Missy G, and Sharon Evans. Tao me topoyo. See you next time.